Hello and welcome back to Cycle Sync with G. Today we're going to debunk PCOS. PCOS affects up to 1 in 10 women of reproductive age, making it one of the most common endocrine disorders for women. Today we're going to go through the symptoms, the science behind these symptoms, potential causes, and how to manage it with lifestyle, exercise, and nutrition. So let's start with the name. PCOS, what does that stand for? And that might give us a clue actually what this disorder is about. PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. So if we break that down, poly meaning many, cystic to contain cysts, ovarian of the ovaries, syndrome, disorder. So basically it's a syndrome or a disorder where there are many cysts on the ovaries. Firstly, yes, I've been calling it a disorder because it is categorized as a hormonal disorder because it affects how the ovaries work. It's characterized by these three things, although not everyone with PCOS has all three. Irregular periods, excess androgen, which are male hormone levels, and polycystic ovaries that they will find on an ultrasound. So as I said, despite the name, you do not need to necessarily have those cysts to be diagnosed with PCOS. It's possible to still meet the other criteria and be diagnosed with PCOS. So my first question when I was researching this is, what are the cysts? What are the cysts in the polycystic ovaries? So the cysts that are found on the ultrasounds on the ovaries are actually immature follicles. Follicles, if you've watched my videos, are the tiny sacs that contain the egg that gets developed in the follicular phase, and then one dominant follicle containing one dominant egg ruptures and that egg is released during ovulation. But in this condition, the tiny sacs, the follicles that contain the eggs, didn't finish developing. But basically, every month, your body grows and releases one egg during ovulation. In PCOS, hormonal imbalances stop that process. So instead of one egg maturing and then ovulating, several follicles start growing, but then they get kind of stuck, and then these undeveloped follicles build up and show up on the ultrasound as cysts. There's lots of these little follicles, so that's why it's called polycystic. The cysts themselves on the ovaries, they're more of a sign that something is wrong or something isn't happening as it should be. So the cysts on the ovaries are not the root cause of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Though once you do have PCOS and these cysts on your ovaries, it kind of gets into a vicious cycle because they can affect hormones simply by being there. Basically, if you've got loads of immature follicles that haven't developed properly and are still like waiting to fully develop and grow, estrogen then stays high for longer because it's like, hey, I haven't actually done my job yet, so I'm gonna hang around a bit longer because estrogen is responsible for the development and the growth of the follicles, as well as FSH. FSH is low typically in PCOS, which is why these follicles don't develop properly. But basically having loads of these immature follicles means that estrogen stays higher for longer. And then when there's no ovulation, estrogen doesn't do that natural drop off and progesterone doesn't start to rise as it would to maintain the thickening of the uterine lining, and also has this balancing effect on estrogen. So you don't have the progesterone, the estrogen stays high, which in itself is a hormonal imbalance. Estrogen is dominant, there's nothing kind of regulating it or controlling it or balancing it. So the cysts themselves, once they're there, do have an effect, but if the cysts were not the root cause, like the initial original reason for PCOS to be triggered, what is the initial cause of the hormonal imbalance? Essentially, what causes PCOS? This was a super grey area and no one really knows what causes PCOS. But what I did find were a few pretty convincing reasons and ways in which PCOS can develop. And basically it's a combination of genetic and lifestyle factors. And this is why lifestyle changes, which we're going to get onto towards the end of this video, can be so powerful for managing and even reversing symptoms. Because the fact that it's genetic, yes, you can't change your genes, but you can absolutely change how your genes are expressed. So before we get into that, the PCOS, so the hormonal imbalance, the undeveloped follicles becoming cysts, often gets switched on by lifestyle, environmental, or hormonal stressors such as chronic inflammation and environmental toxins. Basically, this low-grade inflammation can trigger the ovaries to produce more androgens. It can worsen insulin resistance and disrupt ovulation, which are going to cause this hormonal imbalance. Long-term and chronic stress can affect cortisol, insulin, and other hormonal imbalance. Cortisol and insulin also being hormones, and it's a dysregulation basically within the HPA axis, which is to do with stress. Other lifestyle factors that can trigger PCOS are any of these kind of extreme lifestyle things that might happen, like large amount of weight being put on, poor sleep and disruption in your circadian rhythms, high sugar or processed food diet, and puberty and hormonal events. This is a big one that can kind of trigger PCOS to start. And if it's not puberty, it can be triggered after coming off the birth control pill, after pregnancy, or even during menopause. So you've got all these lifestyle and environmental factors and things that kind of just would go on normally in everyday life, or to anyone basically. You know, you might go through a very stressful period and you might gain a bunch of weight because of that stressful period. You might also be having really poor sleep during that stressful time and be eating loads of high sugar and processed foods. But this is kind of what I'm getting at, is these lifestyle and environmental factors. Yes, that we know these aren't great for health, but why does it affect some people and not others? And that is because of this genetic factor, that you may be predisposed to PCOS. So you may be genetically predisposed to insulin resistance, hormone sensitivity. Your ovaries may be more likely to produce excess androgens, or your hormonal regulation system might just be a little bit more vulnerable to imbalance. And these small genetic factors may increase the likelihood that you can develop PCOS when all these other lifestyle factors occur. So basically what I'm saying is the potential for PCOS can be there from birth, but it's often triggered later, especially during major hormonal shifts like puberty or the other ones I mentioned. But also it's very worth saying that just because you have the genes or you're predisposed to PCOS doesn't mean that PCOS has to express itself. That very much comes down to these lifestyle and environmental factors, which can also affect how strongly it shows up, because lifestyle and environment has a massive influence. So let's start with insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is this involved in the genetic predisposition, which is what I was talking about, which can impact or trigger PCOS to develop and affect the severity and symptoms of PCOS itself. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas. It facilitates the transport of glucose from the bloodstream into the cells for energy. It also promotes the storage of glucose when there's too much glucose. It signals the liver, the muscles, the fat cells to store excess glucose as glycogen, which is a form of stored energy for later. When your body becomes resistant to insulin, as with PCOS, basically the key isn't working well. So what's the body gonna do? It's just gonna make more insulin to try and force the doors open. If it makes enough keys, surely one's gonna fit and the door's gonna open, right? So then you've got loads of insulin, and here's what all that excess estrogen does, especially in the case of PCOS. The first thing is it basically sends this wrong message to the ovaries, basically shouts at the ovaries to make more testosterone, a hormone that we all have, but too much of it can lead to oily skin and acne, body hair and hair growing in different places. Testosterone, as we know, it's a male hormone, so it can trigger male patterns of hair growth and all kinds of hormonal things, right? It's also going to mean that ovulation kind of doesn't really happen as it should, and as a result you're going to have missed or irregular periods. Another thing that all this excess estrogen is going to do is liver makes something called SHBG, which stands for sex hormone binding globulin. SHBG is basically a protein that binds to excess testosterone in the blood and keeps it inactive. So it's very, very responsible for regulating hormones and preventing there being too much testosterone in the body. So all this extra insulin actually tells the liver to stop producing this SHBG. So not only do you have insulin telling the ovaries to make more testosterone, you also don't have that traffic controller that's stopping there being too much testosterone. So now you've got so much testosterone basically floating around in the body, causing those classic PCOS symptoms. In summary, to summarize that, when your body doesn't respond properly to insulin, the natural response is to produce more insulin. That insulin acts on the ovaries, tells the ovaries to produce loads of testosterone because they're just kind of confused, coupled with the fact that your liver isn't producing this other protein that's usually controlling the amount of testosterone floating around. So too much insulin results in loads of testosterone and greater PCOS symptoms. Insulin resistance, as I said, is kind of the main driver behind the severity of PCOS symptoms, which is how lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise can really help with insulin resistance. And it's been shown that PCOS is much more efficiently managed with exercise and nutrition. There's a ton of sports science research that shows how regular physical activity can improve insulin sensitivity, meaning that glucose is used used more efficiently rather than being stored. Physical activity, as we know, can reduce stress and anxiety, which is a symptom of PCOS. It can help with weight management. It can improve your mood and your energy levels if you've got those endorphins and you've worked out. And it can also decrease the risk of any potential developmental conditions as a result of PCOS or insulin resistance, such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease. So exercise is incredibly good for managing PCOS, and a combination of aerobic and strength training is the most beneficial. Because this is a female-specific disorder, syncing your exercise with your cycle can help the body instigate this natural rhythm again, so that if it does start to, produce progesterone after you've ovulated, you're not kind of smacking it back down again, and you're encouraging it and supporting it instead by resting and not doing too much cardio and HIIT and things that might stifle it. But then in contrast to that, if you've got loads of estrogen and testosterone, using it to strength train and use it to do these high energy activities. So the recommended exercises, as I said, strength training 2 to 4 times per week. Cardio is going to help regulate blood sugar levels. So that, like, if you're ovulating or in a follicular phase, maybe more, but stick to about 3 to 4 times per week. And then yoga and Pilates, I would recommend for stress management and overall strength alignment and those kind of more calming things, especially in the luteal phase or on your period, to support hormonal balance. Things to watch out for: basically don't overtrain. Like I've mentioned a lot there, that like exercise is incredibly beneficial for managing PCOS, but overtraining can increase those stress hormones, which is going to worsen the symptoms. As well as that, overtraining, excessive cardio may increase the fatigue and disrupt hormones and hormonal balance too. And of course, if your insulin resistance is pretty severe and you're getting these blood sugar crashes, you really have to be careful with dizziness and feeling of faintedness as well. So listening to your body, exercising intuitively, all of those are key to your long-term success. As I'm a personal trainer now and taking on one-to-one clients, I'd be more than happy to work with anyone on managing this. Onto nutrition, nutritional guidelines for PCOS. Basically, the goal here, as you might have guessed, is to keep blood sugar levels stable and reduce any inflammation. So the way you're going to do this, basically a pretty high protein diet, because those are not going to spike your blood glucose, and combining proteins, or whenever you eat carbs, basically combining it with a protein or a fat source, is going to minimize the glucose spike and then subsequent crash that you might experience. So lean proteins, get your healthy fats from avocados, olive oil, nuts and seeds, wild fish. You want lots of fiber, so vegetables, legumes, whole grains, basically to support digestion and help control blood sugar levels, because they're going to slow the release of glucose into the blood, as well as prevent blood glucose spikes. And anti-inflammatory foods can be great too to reduce inflammation. So your berries, your green tea, turmeric. Foods to avoid: refined carbohydrates. Those are going to spike your blood glucose, and then you've got all this glucose in your blood, which insulin doesn't know what to do with, so it's just going to store it. So that's your white bread, your pastries, bread, pasta, cereal. Go for the whole grain or the brown rice or the higher fiber versions of those things, not the highly processed and refined white carb. Sugary beverages and processed foods, again, that's just a sugar bomb straight into your blood. And then of course, just for natural health and well-being too, these trans fats or excessive saturated fats, which aren't good for anybody, but especially if you're storing fat and struggling shifting fat, these have no benefit to nutrition. And those are the ones found in fried foods or particularly processed foods. So that's it on how to manage your symptoms with exercise and nutrition. Some final things I do want to leave you with is a couple of things around fertility and pregnancy. Like, if you're not ovulating, can you get pregnant? And the answer is yes, you can get pregnant if you have PCOS. But obviously it may be much more challenging due to the irregular ovulation, or not. If you're not ovulating, then of course you need to be ovulating in order to get pregnant. If you've got no egg exposed, doesn't matter how much sperm is in your body. So the ways you can conceive naturally is by tracking your cycle hormonal. You can tell when you ovulate because of a spike in body temperature. So if you're taking your temperature under your tongue, or if you wear a ring or a tracking device, you'll be able to see when your body temperature does rise. That is generally the biggest signal that you are ovulating. There is an egg exposed. So that is the time to try for pregnancy. But ultimately, the goal would be to be ovulating if you're not ovulating already. And of course, get the ovulation regular again. And those are going to be down to mostly cycle syncing, cycle tracking, potentially hormonal support, but which is going to help you understand better what's going on in your body when and if you are ovulating, how long after that you get a period. By that you can judge how your progesterone's doing, what your period is like, how heavy it is, how many days it lasts, how long after that you ovulate again. Basically, understanding and becoming more aware of your body. The more cycles you do that for, the more you will understand and you can see and get to grips what is happening in your body. As a result, you'll know what phase you're in, how to cycle sync your lifestyle and exercise and nutrition and everything to that specific phase, which in turn is going to help balance your hormones overall. And yeah, I hope that was interesting. And now you know a bit more about PCOS.